Hey everyone, welcome to the Fireside Chat number 17 on Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and let me tell you, you are in for some great advice today. On the show today, we have a guest, Phil Snedecor, a trumpet player with an extremely diverse career as a chamber musician and solo performer, orchestral player, recording artist, composer and arranger, contractor for venues, as well as a founder of multiple ensembles. Phil is here to talk all about mastering creating your classical music career on your terms. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started. Hey, Phil. Hey, Eileen. How are you?
Good, how are you?
We're good. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being on today, Phil. So Phil is our special guest today. You are a trumpet player and you've created an extremely unique career, I would say, in the classical world. So we're going to talk all about that and what goes into creating a career like yours. So, Phil, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas. I was a product of the Texas band machine, I call it. It's actually very successful. From eighth grade on, if you're in the band program, you have to take private lessons. And you get really great instruction on your instrument, and the bands sound really good. The downside of that is they tend to work on the same, contest pieces most of the year, so they sound really great and perfect. So the good side is that you get to play these amazing pieces at a very high level. The bad side is you don't necessarily get to work on your sight reading and or your you don't get to go through very much repertoire. But, there's good and bad sides to anything like that. I got a lot out of it. I didn't necessarily like the marching band, but I loved the concert band and the orchestra experience. I did all-state orchestra and all-state jazz band, and, my goal kind of changed as the years went on. I knew I always wanted to play the trumpet. I was unusual that way. From the minute it was kind of a thing to do, I realized I wanted to do this, but I thought I wanted to be lead trumpet in the North Texas 1 o'clock lab band. And then I realized that was not my strong suit. So then I went the classical orchestra route, although I still really enjoy playing jazz and show things.
Okay, so you had a well-rounded, upbringing as far as genres go right away
Yeah,
in Texas.
I
And
was
then
in.
so then Oh, sorry. So then you realized orchestra was better for your playing?
No, I realized I was better
Oh,
at it. I used to
oh,
attend North Texas lab band concerts, the 1 o'clock lab band, when Leon Breeden was the conductor. And I would listen to those guys, and they were just amazing. And then I realized I kind of had this epiphanal moment where I realized that I really couldn't improvise the way those guys did, and I would never really be able to. So I really always still wanted to learn the style and still wanted to play that style, but I knew that I'd never be a star that way. And in the meantime, my classical chops were getting better, and I was working on that. So I just kind of went that way, which I think you have to be willing to do. You have to be willing to look at who you are and your strong points and go with that. So that's what I did, and I ended up auditioning for the big classical schools, Juilliard at Eastman in Indiana, and Northwestern, and I got in them all except for Juilliard, and I went to Eastman and studied with Barb and Charlie, and that turned out well.
yeah, the two famous trumpet teachers, the dynamic duo.
Right.
So then as you were exiting music school, were you on the audition path to get an orchestra job?
I had taken some auditions with various uh, degrees of success, but right out of school, I ended up doing a stint with the Dallas Brass, and
Uh-huh.
that was a natural transition because I was in a quintet at school. I did 1 year of my master's degree at Eastman in the premier brass quintet, the Canterbury Brass, with Doug Prosser and Mark Kellogg and Carolyn Comfort and Dave Silon, and they would send us all over as kind of representatives for the school. So I kind of got my feel for how to manage a chamber music group because I
Mm.
kind of by default was in charge of the logistics on during that year, setting up the transportation and the lodging and the food and I just somebody needed to do it, and I just kind of did it. I don't think I did it very well, but I did it, and I just kind of figured out how to do that. So then I went to the Dallas Brass kind of as a fill-in for Tim Anderson for about 8 months, and I saw how Mike Levine ran the group and learned a little more. And then after that was kind of over, Tim Anderson came back to the group. I went to Chicago and did Civic in Northwest Indiana and Elgin and studied with Arnold Jacobs and Bud Herseth.
Oh, wow. We have that in common. I was
cool.
in Chicago too. Oh,
Bud
that's great.
Herseth. Wow, that's a name I don't hear much anymore. Dang.
Well, he was an amazing coach. A lot of people say, oh, you studied trumpet with Adolf Herseth, and nobody really studies trumpet with Adolf Herseth. You get coached by Adolf Herseth. So your lessons are basically you come in, you play something, and he says, no, don't play like this. And he grabs your trumpet, and he sticks his mouthpiece in your trumpet, and he plays it. And it sounds amazing, and he throws your trumpet back to you, and he said, play it like that. So I got to hear how he did it close up, and that was kind of eye-opening for me. And then you'd go to 1:30 Friday matinees and hear him actually do it, and it was amazing. And that was when George Vosburgh was second trumpet and Will Scarlett was third trumpet, and it was just every Friday at 1:30 you just got your head blown off by those guys.
That's amazing.
So much
That's
excitement.
so awesome.
That
I
is
love
like
that.
epic Chicago Symphony time right there.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
And then you studied with Arnold Jacobs, which is a legend. He's just
Right.
a legend.
Well, and it's worth noting that one of the reasons I went to Chicago is to study with Arnold Jacobs, because during my graduate brass quintet years at Eastman and my Dallas Brass time, I was a very inconsistent player. I would, be great one day and not so great the next day, and I never really figured out my consistency. So I knew I had to do something. I was either going to figure out my playing or go do something else for a living at that point. And so I went to Chicago really to study with Arnold Jacobs, and I just kind of camped out at Ravinia every time he was there and kept asking him for a time until he finally gave me one. And then he taught me off and on for about 4 years, which was great. And I really got a lot out of that. And I still continue to get a lot out of that to this day, because I don't think I understood everything he was saying at the time, but I keep having these moments where like, oh, that's what Jake meant. There you go.
It's interesting what happens as you develop as a player. All the stuff that you didn't get, it got planted in your brain somewhere, but then it comes alive when, you get more experience.
Right.
Oh, totally. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with that statement.
Anyway, I think since this is it's a podcast about, careers and how to build them, I'd like to just comment on the fact that I continued to really, really want to make a living doing this throughout this entire time, even though there were a lot of challenges for me. And I think too many people kind of do this because they think they should, but they don't stop and think, is this really what I want to do at this point in time in my life? And I think we should feel free to regroup every now and then and say, is this what I want to do? And if not, do something else, because there's too many people out there kind of wanting to do this. And then there's a lot of people that really, really, really want to do this. And if you're competing against those people, you're never going to be successful.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. And I think when you get started and you decide, in high school or in college that you want to do this, it's almost scary to consider that you're not going to do that, after having done it for so long. So you have to have a little bit, you have to have some guts to have a look, which sounds like what you were doing over the time. Like you said, I need to go and study with Arnold Jacobs to fix this thing, or else I'm going to find something else to do, is what you said a little earlier.
I was counting the other day. I think I've almost quit the trumpet at least a dozen times.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously?
Yeah, just like I fuck this, I'm going to do something else.
I can absolutely relate to that. That happened to me, Tracy. You don't know that, but that happened to me as well. When in my 20s, I almost quit clarinet like 4 or 5 times until I actually quit clarinet.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to quit. I mean, Eileen, you're very successful now, and you quit. And there's other people that either quit and did something else, or still play their instruments and do something else for a living.
Yeah.
And very successfully. And I think those people like playing more than most people that do it for a living, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
I actually agree with that. I agree with that, because there's something about the I mean, I don't want to paint it in a dark light because I don't think this is true for everybody, but there's something about the stress of the career, because if you are going to choose the career, you do have to create a way that it's going to make money for you if in fact that's going to be your only career. Like, you do have to figure that out if it is going to be your career.
I agree. And so when you don't figure it out, you're stressed about it, like we talked about last time with John. Like, you just end up taking gigs that because you need to make money, and that's not why you became a musician in the first place. So,
well, in the end, everybody has to remember the first notes of the day. You have to completely forget about all the crap that maybe you need to do the rest of the day. You have to remember why you play that instrument and really recreate your relationship with music and your instrument every time. If you do that, I think you're happier on your instrument. If you don't, if you just like, oh God, I got to get up and play this crappy gig, then it's going to snowball and it's going to really be bad. So to try to take something positive from this situation, what I don't want this to be is a bashing of people that do this for a living, because I think they do it. A lot of them are very happy. The ones that are the most happy are the ones that have never forgotten why they're there.
Totally.
right.
Yeah. They have
So
a
take
really,
us through.
they have a really big why, is what you're saying.
Right.
The why is strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
So what was your why then? Like, as you navigated your career after Chicago, did you then, because I know that I want to talk about how you founded some ensembles, and I hear that, you said that you did that brass quintet, which gave you great, probably, insight for how to get one started yourself, the one that you did in college. But what was your first step then after you left Chicago? What was your first career step?
I ended up going to DC where I had nothing. I ended up, so in Chicago, I was there for 4.5 years. I was assistant principal trumpet in Elgin Symphony, principal trumpet in Northwest Indiana. I had a lot of freelancing. I did a brief stint working for Schilke's, which we'll talk about in a minute. Not brief enough, but a brief stint. But I had when we left, I was getting established enough to where it was going a place. So then my wife at the time got a clarinet job in the Marine Band. So I moved to DC with nothing. And I had to start over again, which, sounded bad, but ended up being a good move. I played for the Classical Showcase for the Union, which there's more and more of those around the country. And immediately I got some work at National Symphony and Kennedy Center and things like that. So I came at a good time. Now, if I were to come into town, it would be a different story because there's so many great players in town. It's really hard to break in. I think what I had from the get-go is a drive and a desire to make contact with people and to kind of see what they were doing. And what I always tell my students is that if you're going to go into a new town, you have to kind of make some noise ahead of that and then figure out who the guys are, who the people are that are doing what you want to do, and go seek them out and listen to them and listen to what they're doing and go to concerts and then hang out afterwards and say, hey, how are you doing this and whatever. And then just, they'll know who you are because you're hanging out a little bit, and then pretty soon you're going to get worked into the mix.
Yeah, you have to get yourself out there.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
That's great
That's what
advice.
I did.
I think
And
people
then
stand on the fringe. I think people stand on the fringe instead of doing what you're saying, Phil.
It takes courage to jump in and do something other than stand on the fringe. And it's too easy to sit home in a new city and going, well, I joined the union. Why isn't my phone ringing?
Right.
And it's like, nobody cares that you joined the union, and nobody cares that you are a good player unless they hear you and know, oh, there's the guy that was at our job last week, and he sent me a video and he sounds pretty good, and my regular guys can't do it. Let's give him a shot, or something like that.
Right.
And be willing to take any little crappy job your first year in town and just say yes to everything, even if it's, hey, I need some help setting up some stands at this gig. Just show up and do it, and then see what happens from there.
Great advice.
Yeah. So is that right? You were breaking into the freelance scene in DC. When did you start your brass on? Well, you started a jazz ensemble and a brass ensemble. Is that right around when you did that?
Yeah, you call it a jazz ensemble. Are you referring to the DC Pops Orchestra?
Yeah.
That's a Pops Orchestra.
Oh, it's
I call it
Pops.
a jazz ensemble. I mean, we don't really play jazz. We play societal, pops music, which there's a market for it. So
Oh,
Yeah.
the first thing I did was found the Washington Symphonic Brass, and the way that went down is that I played in the Millar Brass Ensemble in Chicago, and really enjoyed it. And when I landed in DC, there was nothing like that, so I thought, well, I really miss doing that. And at that time, I was subbing with National Symphony with the principal trombone there, Milton Stevens, and he really wanted to conduct something like that, and I had really no desire to conduct. I just wanted to play and arrange. So we got together, and in 1993 we started this as a free concert at a church, and played the Tomasi Fanfare Liturgique and some of my arrangements, and everybody liked it, and it just kind of continued from there. And then we got our 501c3, which is our nonprofit status, and just really haven't looked back. We built that brand really well, I think, and there was a need for that. I think what people have to look at is what does this town need? If there are 5 brass ensembles in your town, you do not need to start a brass ensemble. But if and so in my case, there was no brass ensemble, even though there were a ton of great brass players, and I saw kind of an opportunity there, so I did that. And then with DC Pops Orchestra, the reason we started that is because we saw all these societal events with the congressmen and the big corporations in DC, and I thought, well, we need something that's going to serve that, and so we'll be any number of configurations, from a small 12-piece ensemble to a almost 40-piece ensemble with a singer, depending on the needs. And we'll play at places like the National Building Museum and the Coolidge Auditorium and things like that, where they need certain society orchestras, and that's fun for me. I like putting that together, and there's great players in town that can do that, and I love it when the client's happy, because we're giving them something they need, and we're playing music I enjoy. So that's my goal.
okay. So I've got a question for you, Phil. Tracy, you don't mind if I jump in?
Not at all. Jump in.
So it's really interesting what you're saying here. So there's a couple things now, and I'm going to ask maybe a 2 or 3 part question. So I hope it doesn't throw you. It's really interesting because how old were you about that time when you started these ensembles?
Well, Washington Symphonic Brass, it was 93. I was in my late 20s.
Okay, late 20s, good. So the reason I'm asking you that is because a lot of people we get a lot of private messages at Crushing Classical. People don't really like to talk publicly for whatever reason. That's the classical musician thing. We won't go into that right now. But so we get a lot of private messages, and people have an interest in starting ensembles, and they find, especially when they're in school, do you really think it's realistic for a group to form in school, or is that something that really has to wait until you're, in your 20s and, like let's say you move to an area and now you're meeting brass players or whatever, woodwinds, it doesn't matter, but who are playing in ensembles? Is that because what we're finding is a lot of people are saying, I really want to start an ensemble, but everybody's saying they're too busy. Is that just, what do you think about that? I'm curious.
Well, what, are they too busy going to wind ensemble rehearsal? What
Right.
is that?
Right.
It's like
I
they're
know.
too busy going to music history. At that point, you have to paint a big WTF on your forehead and go, okay, why are you here?
Right.
And then realize that, the group Chicago, they formed at DePaul in Chicago. And
Right.
they're Chicago, the group Chicago, the rock group. And there's countless stories like that of groups that formed in college and stayed together. Most recently, a recent example of that is there's a quintet that's called the Alias Brass. I was going to call them the Anonymous Brass. They're going to kill me. The Alias Brass with Natalie Higgins on horn and Miki Sasaki on trumpet and John Batia on trumpet. It was some really great players, and they formed. They knew each other kind of from college, but they were young, and they stayed together. Now they're geographically apart, but they still rehearse and perform all over the place, and they're building their brand. No, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't form a group in college and stay together if it's good. And the problem with college is that you have some people thinking, oh, I can't do this, and then they don't think the way you need to think. And so, hey, you started in college, and then if the trombone player decides it's not for him or her, then you replace them, but you still get something going, and you learn a lot of things by starting a group. So I would do it as soon as you can.
Yeah. Okay, good. I agree with that. The other question I have for you is, you said something really interesting. You have a different point of view than most people is, well, if there's, five brass ensembles where you live, then don't start another brass ensemble. Like you have to essentially look in the market. I'm going to use my business jargon here for a minute. You have to look in the market and see what's needed, what's wanted, what's missing.
Mhm.
And so can you say a little bit more about that, about how you like assess a market I'm asking you as a musician because I think your point of view is interesting about this.
Well, first of all, you say you're going to use your business hat here. This is a business. We have to realize we're in a business. We're not in an ivory tower where we can just do things without regard to what the market is and where we're going here. So, yeah, I mean, I wanted to start a brass ensemble, but I also realized there was nothing like what I was starting in the area. And actually, really on the East Coast. Summit was out on the West Coast, but there was nothing like a Summit brass or a Millar brass ensemble really anywhere around. Now there are a couple of others that have started, but really I had the marketplace all myself. If there were 4 successful brass ensembles in the area, I might have done something else. And there's all kinds of things you can do, but you can't be rigid in your thinking. It's like, I have to start this because I have to have a brass quintet with 2 trumpets and horn and trombone and tuba, and that's the only instrumentation I will consider playing with. It's like, we're in a day and age where you need to be able to slap together a violin and a harmonica and a trumpet and an accordion and figure out what to do and have fun with it.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
I think people are looking for things like that. Do you know the British band called Bellowhead?
Yeah, actually I do.
No.
I can't believe I know
but
what that is, but yeah, I do.
Yeah, so they started out as a British bar band, and now they play with orchestras all over the place. I actually, when I was with the Baltimore Symphony, I did an arrangement for them of Ode to Joy that Marin took over there. It was kind of an extension of an arrangement I did for Baltimore Symphony, but she said at one point, "Hey, can you do this for Bellowhead?" And I went and bought all their stuff, and I didn't know about them until then. I loved what they did, so I had to write for Washboard and Helicon, and they have a violin and a singer and all these weird eclectic instruments, and I wrote for all of them this chart that went in there that basically did Beethoven's Ode to Joy in their style, which I loved doing, and it was pretty successful. I think they did it at proms, I think, one year.
That's awesome. So is that when you first started to get into composition?
No, absolutely not. No, I started writing when I was in high school. I my first piece was called Shades of Purple, which really dates me. But I wrote it for my high school jazz ensemble, and it was pretty perfunctory composition. But I liked creating music, and I liked messing around on the piano, even though I was never a good pianist at all. But I just started writing when I was in high school because I liked it, and then I kind of continued to do it. And in college, I studied with Rayburn Wright, who was the former arranger of the Radio City Music Hall, and he was also the jazz and contemporary media guy at Eastman. And I picked his brain all I could and took film scoring and things like that. So, but I never formally studied composition, and I think that's a good thing for me because I have a style that's more traditional and tonal than most composition majors, and not that composition majors don't do great things. I'm just saying that for my style and the way I write, I needed to kind of do my own thing rather than just use techniques, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, but I just think it's something I always felt that it was missing in my musical education, and I just think it really helps when you can arrange, and like you're saying, for groups, that when you're trying to become more creative instead of just putting together a brass quintet because that's the only ensemble you can think of as a horn player or whatever, to be able to put these more unique ensembles together and then be able to write for them, that is so key. So I think it's awesome that you started in high school and then continued to seek about that, regardless of if you took formal lessons or not. You continued to dig in and figure out more stuff about it. So,
well, let's talk about
great.
exactly what this is. If you want to arrange something, just sit down and arrange something. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to take a course. It's not rocket science. You know what the transpositions are, and you can. I can say to you, go do an arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner and make it cool in your eyes, and you could probably do it. It might
Easily.
take you longer than me,
right,
but you
right,
could.
Yep.
And
right.
same with any given ensemble. If I gave you 5 really weird instruments, like I just did, like, helicon and washboard and violin and trumpet and, alto sax, you could probably sit down, put those in Finale or Sibelius, and at some point come up with something. And then the next one's going to be better, and the next one's going to be better. So really what has to be there is the desire. And I think people limit themselves by, oh, I didn't take this course, I don't know how to arrange. That's bullshit. If you want to arrange, you know how to arrange.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a great attitude.
That's great. Great advice.
So, and now you have a lot of compositions that you provide, that you sell, correct? Your brass ensemble stuff, and you continue to.
So I have a lot of my arrangements available. Some of them I was surprised that I got permission to arrange, that I got permission to sell. I got this arrangement of Romeo and Juliet that everybody's told me I'd never get permission for. And 6 months after I wrote, I think it was Boozy and Hawks or Schirmer, they came back and they go, sure, it'll be $75 and 12.5% of what you sell it for. I'm like, okay. And now it's available. And so that's all cool. Sometimes you don't know what you can arrange until you ask. I know that Bernstein and John Williams, you'll never really get permission to do any of that, so just forget about it. But the other things that you think you might not get, it just takes finding the publisher and writing and saying, and they take a long time to get back to you, but every now and then you'll get a yes. But yes, so I have that, but I also write these etude books, as you know, and if you want me to briefly talk about that, I started that when I landed in DC with not much work and I needed something to do. So a friend of mine told me about this competition that they were saying, write an etude book and we'll give you, if you win, we'll give you $5,000. So I entered that competition and wrote my first lyric etudes for trumpet and sent it in and did not even place. And I was like, well, this sucks. And so then I sent it to I sent it to some friends of mine. I sent it to, Barb and Charlie, and I sent it to some other people, and I sent it to Vinny DiMartino. And Vinny DiMartino calls me the day he gets it. And he goes, hey, Phil, these are great. I'm going to send this to my friend Dennis Avey at Robert King and tell him to publish it. And he did, and then it just took off.
Wow, and, that's great.
Since written, 4 other books for various instruments off of that, and I just finished my second Lyrical Etudes Volume 2, which has been pretty successful. So
that's great.
Again, with no composition formal training, I just sat down and wrote these, and it struck a nerve with people because they're lyrical and they take interesting turns, and they're not that hard.
Well, here's another thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil. Sorry.
I was going to say there was a market and a need for an etude book that wasn't going to kill you. That was, and again, those ones that are like the Biche and the top tones. There's market for those because they really test your endurance, and you have to be a really great player to get through them. Mine, you can get through mine when you're in junior high. If you're a good junior high player, you can get through one of my etudes. It might not be the way David Bilger gets through my etudes, but you can get through it, and there's a lot to learn from that. So there was a market for that. Go ahead, Eileen.
Well, here's what I was going to say, Phil. So another really big lesson out of everything you just said is, you found a competition, you said, I'm going to do an etude book, you wrote the etude book, you submitted it, and you didn't win. You could have cried in your soup and shoved the etude book in the bottom of a drawer. What you did was you took it out and you sent it to a bunch of people. I think there's a really big lesson in, I'm just going to call it promoting yourself. I think it's probably bigger than that, but I'd like you to speak to that because there was, you decided that it didn't end with you didn't win the competition. And let's be clear, most classical musicians end it with, I didn't win the audition, I didn't win the competition, my life is over. So I just want to know what you have to say, if you can just say something about that.
Well, first of all, I'll tell you the end result, and that is the book that won that competition. Nobody's ever heard of it. Nobody that I know ever plays it, and it's just kind of died. So
interesting.
They won, and I won't say the name of the person or anything, but that person won and was successful at that moment. But over the life of my book, I've made way more than $5,000 off that book. Yeah. And it's been wildly successful. So I kind of believed in it. I think you have to believe in your product. Your product, whether it's an etude book or your own playing or whatever you've invented or are creating, and we're artists, so we're creating every day. When we go out and give a performance, we're creating. You have to believe in that product. It's just like if you invent some piece of computer equipment and you're selling it, you can't think it's a piece of crap and go sell it. You have to think, this is really cool, I like this, and I think other people are going to like it, and you have to believe in it. And so what I always tell people is that if you're playing music, you damn well better like the music you're playing, and if you don't like music you're playing, figure out how to like it, and if you still can't do it, then play something else. Because the last thing I want to hear as an audience member is somebody out there playing something that they hate.
I agree.
And you can tell too, I think.
Absolutely.
You know,
and so
absolutely.
Sometimes our job as freelancers or orchestra musicians is to play a piece, and you get it and you go, oh, boy, I really don't like this piece. But when you're playing that piece, that's got to be your favorite freaking piece right then. You have to sell it to the audience because that's your job. And basically, if you don't do that, you're doing yourself and the audience and the composer a disservice. And if you really can't muster that in yourself, then you need to not play that job or not play that piece or somehow take yourself out of that situation, because that's killing the business as a whole, in that there's too many people out there playing music that they obviously don't like and that they're not, and they're just not having fun.
Mm-hmm. And also for musicians not to have the judgment of another human being be a finality for them. You know, I didn't get chosen for the job, so I suck, or I should stop playing, or whatever. Like you've got to find, you have to believe in yourself. Like you said, you've got to find it, you have to know in yourself that this is what you want to be doing, and that what you do or what you're producing is worth being heard or being seen or whatever.
I learned a lot from my friends that went into business. I have a really good high school friend who ended up majoring in business and in marketing, I guess. Anyway, he's a big wig now, and he probably a millionaire. And he started he started with some companies in Chicago early on, and became rose up fairly high, and then in the end of these, and in the end they ended up ousting him, like he's like president, and they just paid him a bunch of money to go away. And I said, Steve, how do you deal with that? And he goes, oh, it's great. It's only business. That's going to happen in everything. I mean, people that are in the business don't like what you're doing, so they'll just find some way to get you out, and you just go start something else. So don't take it personally. Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, that's what they do. And he just went on to something else. Yeah. And the luxury he had is that there were 9 companies in Chicago that needed what he had, and unfortunately, if you get ousted by the Chicago Symphony, there's not another Chicago Symphony in town on that level. But right. You know what I mean. You just have to turn around and do something else in a different way and still sing the song you're singing, which is what he did.
Do you have another example from your career that you used that lesson? That was a great example that you just gave us about your lyrical etude book, where you didn't take it personally and just kept going, and it really served you well. So do you have any other? I mean, I'm glad that's a great lesson. I mean, I know business people have a different way of looking at business compared to how musicians take things so personally, and I wonder if you have another example from your career where you lived that.
Well, if you're steering toward the Baltimore Symphony story, maybe now is the time to tell it.
Well, yeah, I think I was wondering if maybe that because you said that, like, they when people oust you. So tell us the story.
Okay, so the interesting thing about my appointment at the Baltimore Symphony is that I won that job after I had a pretty successful freelance career going, and I could have continued down that path and done that, but the good thing is I was always getting better at the trumpet. I still am. And I'm not just like, oh yeah, I play on a certain level and I'm just going to maintain that. I'm always looking for new and better things to do with my playing. And so I was getting better and better, and I was, starting to do really well again in auditions. And I'll preface that by saying when I was young and, in Chicago, I was doing really well in auditions, and I made the finals for the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I was runner-up for Louisville Orchestra, and I was, there was all these things that I was really close. And then when I moved to Chicago, to Washington, I kind of put the audition on the back burner because we were there for 4 years no matter what. And so I worked on the freelance career. So then when I went back to the audition, I wasn't as successful, and I couldn't figure out why. And so then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to figure this out. So I sat down and I was like, okay, what do I need to do different? And I made some changes and tweaked some things and paid attention to that. And then I, before I knew it, I had won the Baltimore Symphony job. And even though that was kind of just a free audition that I took to kind of practice for the other auditions, I ended up winning it because it was just up the road. So that Maren, and so the story is Maren had just been appointed. She and the committee was like, oh yeah, he won the audition no matter what. And then the trumpet players that were there, the principal and the assistant principal were like, well, we don't want him. And they tried to null and void the audition. And Maren's like, no, we're not doing this. We're gonna, he's our guy. And so they, for 2 years during my probationary period, we played, and it was good. We made some great recordings, and I had every 8 weeks I got letters from the committee saying I was doing a good job and everything's fine and great to have you here, blah blah blah. It was like a tenure review committee type thing. And then after, I guess it was after a year and a half, they had to make the final vote for my tenure, and they went in a room and Maren's like, okay, we're good, right? And the principal and the third said, no, we don't want him. We're going to vote against him because we never wanted him. And she did not want to go against those people. So I needed her vote, and she didn't give it to me. So that in a nutshell is what happened. So I was able to finish out the rest of my second year. And I was, that I did take that personally because that was hard not to take personally. But I had to, looking back on it, I should have just said, well, that was business, and I knew that they didn't want me to start, so I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but I was. So anyway, fast forward another 6 months, they have the audition for my spot, and again, I'm like, okay, I'm working on auditions, and this is a free audition, so I'm going to go take it. And, I pretty much got it that time too, even though they didn't give it to me. They were like, well, you won this audition, but we're not going to give this to you because you've already been, you've been through a probationary period, and our policy is we're not going to give you another one, but we'll make you this is for second, by the way. We'll make you fourth trumpet because, even though there's not a position, and if there's ever a fourth trumpet position reinstated in the orchestra, it's yours. And I said, well, can I have that in writing? And they're like, no. And of course, the end of that story. Anything you don't get in writing, forget it. And, look, Leon Lebowitz, the union lawyer, said to me, if you don't have tenure, they can fire you for the color of your socks, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you can't go and you can't do anything about this, basically. Get out of what you can and walk away. And it took me, that really threw me for a loop. But I'm so much happier now where I've landed. So I'm happy it happened. But sometimes it takes hard things like that to kind of show you your path. And my path was not being second trumpet in Baltimore Symphony. It's fine that I'm not. But at the time, I did take it personally, and I shouldn't have.
Right. So this probably is a good moment to ask you about taking full ownership of your career, which is something that we talked about before we had you on today, because you say that this is so important as a classical musician now. So can you tell me in a couple of sentences what you think taking full ownership of your music career means?
It means not giving other people power to steer your career in a direction you don't want it to go, like the unemployment line. I mean, if you don't want to be a starving musician, don't be a starving musician. Do something you love and figure out how to get paid for it. And nobody can tell you not to do that. You just have to find the right thing. So, let's just take the orchestral audition. The orchestral audition in general has gotten to be this really Herculean task of playing all these notes perfectly with the right style, and you could guess, anybody's guess can be exactly what the right style is for that particular orchestra. And then you have usually like a 9-person committee. And anytime you have a committee, you get the least offensive solution to any problem. I'll say that again. Anytime you have a committee, you get the least offensive solution to any problem. So, you're going to get the least offensive player coming through the prelims and the semis, and then you're expected to be Bud Herseth in the finals. where
I know.
have played milk toast until then, and then you're expected to do something else. So, and again, I'm generalizing. Not all orchestras are like this, but enough of them. It's why orchestras sound the way they sound. They sound really perfect. They don't miss any notes, but I just don't think they're as exciting as they used to be. And again, I don't mean to be overly critical about my colleagues that are in orchestras right now. I think they do great things, and I think they are starting to steer away from that model. But I think you have the perfect players getting the job, and then they want to hear other perfect players. And the goal is not perfection, ladies and gentlemen. It's imparting some emotion, imparting some part of yourself to the audience. And I just don't think orchestras are doing that. So you listen to Concertgebouw and you listen to other orchestras like that. And Concertgebouw, they miss their fair share of notes, but I'd much rather listen to them than a lot of American orchestras. I just would.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
I like it.
So when you take responsibility for your own stuff and you create your own career, kind of like I have, then you can do your own thing, and it's fun. Now, those listening can say, well, easy for him to say, he's all established and blah blah blah, but you got to start somewhere. And I'm not saying you can't play with orchestras and have fun and even get an orchestra job. Get an orchestra job. If that orchestra job is not doing what it should be doing for you, don't quit the orchestra job. Start something else on the side. I have a lot of colleagues in the National Symphony and the Baltimore Symphony that do their own groups on the side and really get what they need out of it that way. And that's what I mean about taking charge of your own career. Don't make the job make you unhappy, or don't make the institution you're trying for define you as a person or a player. Just keep going, and something's going to happen.
Right. So if someone's listening today, and they're going, okay, so I'm young and maybe I'm still in college. What would you say their first step should be as they go to begin their career to take ownership of it from the very beginning?
Find something you love doing and then figure out how to get paid for it. So so you can say, well, I love to play the horn. That's kind of a generic thing to say, but then say, well, what kind of music do I like playing on the horn the best? Maybe you like country and western music. Okay, go start a country and western music that a group that includes horn. I'm just throwing something outlandish out there, but sure. Who knows? That could be really cool, right? How many country and western bands have a horn? That could be like a thing, right? So, right. But by the way, you can use that if you want.
Well, no one ever thought there would be a dubstep and ballerina dance and violin, and now there's Lindsey Sterling, and she's raking in the dough. So exactly you're right.
That's exactly right. So find, and you might not even know exactly what you're going to end up doing, but just do something. And this is the other thing I tell people. If you're out of college, or even if you're in college, but let's say you're just out of college and you have a master's degree in horn performance or, flute performance or whatever, you have a job. If you're sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, watching Netflix, that's not your job. You work 8 hours a day doing something to further your career, whether it's practicing or working on your website or making contacts or writing arrangements or starting your group or figuring out how to get a 501c3. Work 8 hours and then you can have a beer. But don't wake up in the morning going, gee, it's another day of waiting for the phone to ring. That's not your job. The phone is not going to ring. You've got to go out there and make some rain, make things happen for yourself, and it's possible. But the people that are just used to, and most musicians actually are used to doing things kind of unsupervised, which makes us good computer programmers, by the way, because computer programmers have to sit in a room and they solve a problem. Well, we as musicians, okay, I can't tongue well. Okay, let me figure this out. We're good at that. So take that skill and make it into a positive thing for your career and go figure out how to make it rain.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's it's the advice that we're constantly giving, which is you cannot just work on your playing. You actually have to work on your career, and that's really what you're saying.
But the other end of it is don't forget about your playing.
Yeah. Sure.
Because
But you can't, if you practiced 8 hours straight in a day, that would be not so good for your chops, at least if you're a brass player. You have, you can do
absolutely.
both.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got your 3 hours a day to practice or whatever you want to do, and then you've got 5 more hours.
Right.
Yes.
Which is actually a lot of
Absolutely.
time. You can actually do a lot with 5 hours.
That's exactly right. And truthfully, if you are a freelancer and you don't have a second job, let's say you're not working at, the local whatever to make ends meet, and you have the luxury of just being a freelancer, then you can put in a lot more than 8 hours. And truthfully, I haven't had an 8-hour day in a long time. It's usually 10 or 12 or something like that. So we work a lot more than your regular people that just do 8 hours a day. But we like it, so we don't think of it as long hours. So do something. Do something every day that's going to further your career, and you'll be surprised at what happens.
And
it's not going to happen right away, but it'll happen eventually.
Yeah, and also I'll add to that, do it while you're in college. I think a lot of people wait till they're out of college to further their career. I think that's a huge mistake. I just really think that's a mistake.
I do too.
Yeah, you can't just, you can't just have no direction out of college. And so doing it when you're in college as early as you want, really. Just figure out what you want to do.
Exactly.
I was going to say that some people do take the playing thing and say, okay, I've got that together. I'm going to put that over here and just work on the career. And I've seen too many players put themselves in the right place at the right time, and then they don't have the playing to back it up. And you have to get the playing first, because there's too many smoking players out there. And if I happen to call you for some gig with WSB or DC Pops or a quintet job, and you show up and you play mediocre, I'm sorry, I have too many options out there. And so I'm not going to call you back if you play mediocre. You have to be able to play great first. So that is the first thing you need to get together. But then, like you said, there's lots of hours in the day. So put in your time, get better all the time. Don't stop, ever stop getting better, first of all. Too many people's like, well, I'm good, so I'm just going to stay here. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. There's no staying.
That's right.
So that's got to be your first priority.
Right. So Phil, you just said if you call somebody for this job or that job, so you are a contractor, which is awesome. And how I want to know two things: how you ended up getting into it, because I know a lot of musicians think that would be a great, really lucrative thing to do. So how did you get into it, and is it lucrative? Both of those things. Yeah.
Well, how I got into it, I think you can't necessarily say I'm going to go contract X, Y, and Z production. I mean, you have to start making your own productions and contracting your own stuff, and that's how I started. So my first foray into contracting was, I will say my first education in contracting kind of was the Canterbury Brass in Eastman, the student group. I didn't contract that, but I did everything a contractor does, all the logistics and everything, and made sure everybody had the rehearsal times and the concert times and the sound check times and all that stuff. That's part of contracting, is just the logistical end of it. And then I didn't really do any contracting in Chicago, but when I came to DC and I started the Washington Symphonic Brass, that's basically a 17-person contracting job. You have the brass and the conductor, and you have to make sure that the rehearsals are all there, and you have to choose who's going to be in the ensemble, and all that stuff that a contractor does, and then pay and all that stuff. So I started contracting my own group, and I think that's the first thing you need to do, is start making your own concerts, start contracting your own stuff, and then pretty soon somebody notices, that person is producing that concert. You're producing concerts, and that's a kind of contracting that shows initiative and shows other people that you kind of know what's going on. And pretty soon people noticed, and then I got to contract X, Y, and Z. But basically, I got to contract for a lot of these churches in DC who needed brass groups, and instead of hiring generic throw together brass groups, they would hire the Washington Symphonic Brass Quintet or Octet or Dectet or the whole group. And they had me contract. And so contracting is structured a number of ways. Dave Flowers, who's the former second trumpet for National Symphony, who has since passed on. He taught me a lot about contracting because he used to contract for a lot of the choral groups in the DC area. And as far as money is concerned, it usually pays an extra person. So if everybody's getting $450 for the job, you get $450 for contracting and then $450 for playing. You know what I mean? So it's like an extra person. And then there's a negotiated percentage on top of that that you can either waive or you can negotiate it. And it can be as much between 2 and 5%. So if it's a 60-person orchestra and the payroll is $20,000, you can potentially make, a significant amount on top of that if it's like 5%, just for, and I like that scenario because that means the more people they have you hire, the more you get, as opposed to just the extra person. So sometimes I'll say, okay, you don't have to pay me an extra person rate, I just want the percentage. So it's negotiable based on who you're contracting for, but yes, it definitely pays and it's definitely worth it. It's not easy though. Some people think, oh, that's a really easy way to make extra money. I guarantee you the night before the job, when the viola player flakes out on you and you're making phone calls, that's not easy.
Oh, right.
Viola. I just pull viola out of my hat. But, things happen. People drop out. You have to plug holes at the last minute. You've got personnel issues, in the strings. Such and such won't sit with such and such, so you have to put such and such as principal second, put this person here. All that crap, you have to deal with that. And if people aren't happy, and then, the harp person wants more cartage because it's a long load in, yada, yada, yada. There's stuff you have to deal with, and you're earning your money based on that. And that's all your headache if you're the contractor.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, but when you're the contractor, probably people are very interested in being your friend, right?
Yeah, that's the part I don't like so much, actually, because these are people that wouldn't normally give you the time of day if you weren't the contractor, but they come out of the woodwork once you're the contractor. And so the recent job I just got last year was the Wolf Trap contracting, and that sounds actually more prestigious than it is because Wolf Trap has pared down its orchestra usage over the last, I'd say, 8 years, because they're using National Symphony for a lot of its operas and its productions. So like, for instance, this year they're doing 2 opera productions with National Symphony, and then stuff like The Legend of Zelda with National Symphony. Usually National Symphony wouldn't touch that stuff, but they've got kind of now a new relationship. So I'm contractor for the Wolf Trap orchestras. So right now we're in the middle of a Rossini opera. It's a 28-person orchestra that's in the pit of the Barns. And I contract that, and then next week I'm actually contracting and playing Little Mermaid, and there's 12 people in the pit for that. And then I do another opera in August, and let's see, last month we did Bernadette Peters, and we're doing Aretha Franklin in July. So there's some stuff going on. It's not near as much as it was, but that's okay. But it all adds up. Ray Ricker, who wrote this book called Lessons from a Streetwise Professor, that I really highly recommend. And it's by Raymond Ricker, and he calls it Legos. And your career should be built on Legos. So you're not just doing one thing. Some people can, but most people put different things in the puzzle, the Legos, that creates this whole career. So that's what I do.
That makes sense. Yeah, Legos, like multiple streams of income, essentially.
So I have tons. I mean, I can't even sit down and list all the streams of income I have, because sometimes I forget about some. I have this Wolf Trap thing which pays. I couldn't live off Wolf Trap. It's just a summer thing, and even if it's just one of the things I do. Right. But between all the different things I do, I make a really good living, and I make as much as somebody playing in a Big 5 orchestra, but I don't have to go sit next to the same people every day and play. And some people like that, and some people like the regularity of it. Actually, my years in Baltimore were in some ways, some of the nicest years of my life, because I really didn't have to work that hard at all, except for playing my part. I just showed up and played my part. I was like, wow, this is great. I don't have to do anything. All of you. I don't have to figure out repertoire or worry about audiences or sell tickets or find venues, any of that shit. I was just showing up and playing. It was great. So
that's awesome.
But
Yeah,
I
there's
missed, in the end, I missed the creativity of doing all the stuff I just mentioned.
right. So, Phil, when we were talking before the show, you had mentioned that you think that people generally have a fear of pissing people off. And so I wondered if you could expand on that because
I don't
as
think it's
someone,
just, I don't think it's a, we think they do. We know they do.
we know they do. Yeah.
Classical musicians are deathly afraid of pissing people off. Let's be clear.
Yeah, and when you become a freelancer, a lot of times, and I've seen this so many times where musicians, their personality becomes like this person who does never want to step on any toes, or they're very fearful about causing any kind of upset. And now that you're a contractor, I'm sure you see people, I don't know, maybe even walking on eggshells around you to make sure that they don't piss you off. And so I just want to know since we talked about it earlier, what your take on that is and how you gave that up for yourself, because everyone kind of has that starting out for sure.
Well, first of all, I think it's useful I don't think you want to go out every morning saying, I'm going to piss somebody off. I mean, I think that's not a good plan.
Definitely not.
It's always good to be able to work well with people and not be a pain in the ass about things. So let's just talk about what you're talking. When you say pissing somebody off, do you mean being overly candy coated at the gig, or what do you mean exactly?
I think because people are so afraid of upsetting somebody or being accused of saying the wrong thing, that overly candy coated,
Right. And I see that. I mean, if first of all, let's talk about the other extreme. You can be the kind of freelancer that walks in and goes, my chair is not right, my stand, blah, 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 and it's too cold in here, and just be kind of a pain in the ass and have everybody have to kind of accommodate you. And I think you need to stop that. It's not about you. Go get another chair, go get another fucking stand, sit down, shut up, and play. But beyond that, and I was always that kind of person that if my stand wasn't right, I never complained to the stagehands or the contractor. I just got another stand. I just fixed it. And you have to be part of that solution, not that problem. But then there's the other kind that is always very careful and choosing their words. And, they feel like they have to do that for whatever reason. I don't think you should sit there and complain the whole time. I do think that people end up owning this persona that maybe is not true to themselves. And I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah. And you have to be true to yourself. If you're playing a piece that's the worst piece of music you've ever heard in your life, and somebody comes up and says, why are we playing this? And you just kind of smile and go, oh, it's lovely. I mean, whatever. I mean, you're not being true to yourself. Again, I do think that complaining feeds on itself, so I don't think you should complain, but I do think you should be true to yourself. And basically call a spade a spade. If you're like, yeah, this probably shouldn't be here, say it. And be part of the discussion rather than just kind of a wallflower. But you have to be true to yourself, I think, and you have to not just. I think we were talking earlier about people who have specific personas when they show up at a job, and that's their choice. Yeah. I don't think I think everybody sees through that. Yeah, but that's the choice they've made.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had conversations with people who have these personas, and you can only talk like about the weather or, what nice new top you have on or something. Like you can't even, there's nothing that you could say, unless you're talking all sunshine and roses. Like, I'm not saying you should be able to feel free to complain and bitch and moan all the time, but like you said, be real and just be yourself. Otherwise you end up feeling like you can't be yourself, and that's not a good place to be. And I don't think it's necessary to be like that when you're a freelancer.
Well,
it's
let's
ridiculous.
Take the example of you're in an orchestra and they're playing some piece that the executive director's nephew wrote, and it's a piece of garbage, and everybody knows it, and you're struggling through it, and the guy doesn't know orchestration, and there's missed notes. I mean, there's wrong notes in the score, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of just saying this really sucks, you can say, hey, next time we do this, why don't we have a more fair way of choosing this piece, and let's work toward that. Let's, this is a done deal, but let's fix this. Let's be part of the solution, because just complaining about it doesn't really do anybody any good.
Right. Or I have an example of when the conductor is hard to follow. Someone that's hard to follow. And you're not necessarily going, oh, this guy's terrible, but you can say, like, look, I don't really know what's going on in measure 17, and it's a little hard to follow for me. Do you have any pointers on how you know, so that I can make sure I'm with you? Because I don't want to, or whatever. It's not like to just bash the conductor, but just to be honest and say, there's a situation where I need help, and I hope that we can at least talk about it. So, I'm not trying to talk bad about the conductor, but I'm saying, like, I have a situation here that I need to make sure I'm together with people. I've had a situation like that before.
And always knowing that you have to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So
exactly.
In anything you're a part of, so whether you're in an orchestra or whether you're in a chamber group or whatever, complaining doesn't really solve any problems. But yes, recognizing the problem and working toward a solution is indeed necessary. And if you're denying the problem, then you're not part of the solution.
Exactly. Well, this has been a great talk. Eileen, do you have any other things to bring up with Phil about owning your career?
No, I think I think we really covered everything. There's just a lot of really good pointers in here, a lot of really good, and especially career advice. I think it's really valuable to hear your point of view, especially the whole idea of having multiple streams of income. I think, that makes you really unique for sure. I realize there's other musicians doing that, but I think that's, a lot of what's made you so successful, Phil.
Well, thanks. I think that's a model for the future too, because I think there'll be fewer and fewer 52-week orchestras coming in the coming years. I think the market's been saturated by those. There's a lot of orchestras that are 52-week now that probably shouldn't be, in that their community probably won't support them, which is why we're seeing all these crises in the in the orchestral world. So let's just recognize that and know that you might not be in a 52-week orchestra. You might be in a 32-week orchestra, which there's nothing wrong with that, and that could play great. But then the other 20 weeks of the year, you have to figure out something else to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's going to really add to your life. It's not going to subtract. You shouldn't sit there and bemoan the fact that you're not a 52-week orchestra. Maybe you really like living in that part of the country and you're in a 32-week orchestra. Do something else that you love and add to your income and add to the joy that is your income stream and your profession, rather than be pissed off that you're not in the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Right.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and you know what? When you do that, like you said, you get to do these other gigs in the summer, and granted, they wouldn't support you if that was all you had to do, but you get to do something different at that, during those summer months, and then you get a break from it and do other things during the regular season, and it just provides variety as well as multiple income streams. So I think your points are so valuable for people, and especially because I think people have kind of a misconception about that all they need to do is get that one job. I know I did. Like, oh, I just need a job, and it's not enough.
Well, you have to be open to doing other things, and that's my main message today. Is that if you're open to it, things will find you, and if you're not open to it, then you're going to be closed off in your own world. I was always open to doing other things. I really enjoyed doing other parts of the business other than just playing trumpet. And so you've got to be open to that. And people see it. If you're open to it, your body language and everything will be pointed toward that. And if you are not, same thing. Your body language will be like, no, don't bother me. Don't ask me to do anything else. I'm just here to play the violin today. And, if you... And it's funny, your previous guest, John Fink, was always like that. It's like, what do you need? I'd have him on like a DC or Pops Orchestra job, and he'd see that the setting for the strings is all screwed up, and he'd just jump up and fix it. And that's the kind of people I need around me, and that's the kind of people that everybody needs around me. Part of somebody that's in it for the whole thing, not how much you're going to pay me to move those stands. Just do it and see what happens. be part of the solution.
It's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. I really enjoyed your viewpoint on, being classical musician today for real. It's very enlightening. I really enjoyed it. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for producing such a valuable podcast.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks, Eileen. And if you're all enjoying Crushing Classical, please join us in the conversation at the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Crushing Classical, and on facebook.com/Crushing Classical and Instagram. And we'll see you. And also, of course, write a review on iTunes if you can. That would be great. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.